The rain pounded Seattle's streets, a relentless drumbeat that drowned out the world. But inside the Starbucks on Pike Street, it was warm, alive, electric. I stood at the counter, soaked to the bone, my leather jacket dripping onto the polished floor, and caught his eyes hazel, flecked with gold, like the city's fleeting sunlight. He asked, "Hot or iced?" And I swear, the way his voice curled around the words, it wasn't just about coffee. His name tag read Elliot, and he wore the green apron like it was a second skin, moving with a quiet confidence behind the counter. I was Caleb, 24, a graphic designer scraping by in a city that chewed up dreamers like me. I'd come here every morning for weeks. Not for the overpriced lattes, but for the way Elliot's smile tilted just for me. Like a secret only we shared. "Hot," I said, my voice catching, and his lips twitched, a spark igniting in those hazel eyes. "Coming right up," he replied, and I felt the weight of something unspoken settle between us. Seattle was a paradox, a city of open minds and closed hearts. I'd grown up in a small town an hour away, where being gay was a sin whispered about in church pews, not a life you lived out loud. I'd fled to the city to find freedom. But freedom came with a price: loneliness, late-night doubts, and the constant fear that I'd never belong. Starbucks was my refuge, a place where the hum of conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine drowned out my insecurities. And then there was Elliot, who made every morning feel like it could be the start of something. He handed me the cup, our fingers brushing for a split second, and my heart stuttered. "Caleb, right?" he said, like he'd been practicing my name. I nodded, too stunned to speak. How did he know? I'd never said it. Not once. He leaned closer, his voice low. "I pay attention to the regulars." The air between us crackled, and I wondered if he felt it through the pull. The possibility. The danger of wanting something you're not sure you're allowed to have. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment. The way his eyes lingered. The way his hand had paused just long enough to make me question everything. I'd spent years building walls, keeping people at arm's length. Because love, for someone like me, always came with a catch. My last relationship, if you could call it that, had ended in a screaming match in a parking lot, with my ex calling me too much and not enough in the same breath. I'd sworn off dating, sworn off hope, but Elliot was unraveling me, one coffee at a time. The next morning, I was back, heart pounding like I was walking into a battlefield. The cafe was packed, but Elliot spotted me instantly. "Hot again?" he asked, and there it was, that smile, that spark. I nodded, and he scribbled something on the cup before sliding it across the counter. When I looked down, I saw it. "Meet me after my shift." For PM. My breath caught. This was no ordinary coffee order. This was a leap. At 4 p.m., I waited outside, the rain now a soft drizzle. Elliot emerged, his apron gone, replaced by a faded denim jacket that made him look like he belonged in a folk song. "You came," he said, surprised, like he hadn't expected me to show. "I'm here," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He gestured toward a small park nearby, and we walked, the city buzzing around us, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. We sat on a bench, the damp wood creaking under our weight. "I've seen you every day for weeks," he said, his voice soft but deliberate. "You always look like you're carrying something heavy." I froze. How did he see through me so easily? I wanted to deflect, to laugh it off, but his eyes held mine, and I couldn't look away. "Maybe I am," I admitted, the words spilling out before I could stop them. But you make it feel lighter. He smiled, and it was like the clouds parted. I'm not supposed to hit on customers, he said. But you're not just a customer. Caleb. My name in his mouth felt like a promise. We talked for hours about his dream of opening his own cafe, about my sketches that never saw the light of day, about the way the world felt too big and too small all at once. When the streetlights flickered on, he reached for my hand, and I let him. It was the first time in years I didn't pull away. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments. Elliot and I met after his shifts, wandering Seattle streets, sharing stories under the glow of neon signs. He told me about growing up in Portland, raised by a single mom who taught him to bake but never quite understood why he loved men. I told him about my dad, who'd called me a disappointment when I came out at 17, and how I'd spent every day since trying to prove him wrong. We were two broken pieces, fitting together in ways I hadn't thought possible. But nothing stays perfect. One evening, as we sat in a dive bar nursing cheap beers, Elliot's phone buzzed. His face darkened as he read the message. Everything okay? I asked, my stomach twisting. He hesitated, then shoved the phone in his pocket. Just my ex, he said, his voice tight. He's persistent. I wanted to ask more, but the way his jaw clenched told me to let it go. For now. We kissed for the first time that night, outside the bar, rain slicking our faces. It was desperate, hungry, like we were trying to outrun something. His lips were warm, tasting of coffee and mint, and I felt myself falling, fast and hard. But when we pulled apart, his eyes were shadowed. Caleb, he said, I need to tell you something. My heart sank. I knew that tone, the one that came before bad news. He told me about Ryan, his ex, who'd left him 6 months ago after a year of gaslighting and control. Ryan was older, charming, the kind of guy who could make you feel like the center of the universe one day and invisible the next. He's been texting me, Elliot admitted. Says he wants me back. I felt a cold knot in my chest. Do you want him back? I asked, barely breathing. Elliot shook his head. No. But he doesn't take no for an answer. The next week, I noticed a change in Elliot. He was jumpier, glancing at his phone like it might bite him. At the cafe, his smiles were forced, and he fumbled orders, something he never did. I wanted to help, but I didn't know how. I was falling for him, but I was terrified of pushing too fast. My own past wasn't exactly clean. I'd hurt people too, running from my own fears. What if I wasn't enough to keep him safe from his? One night, we went to a queer open mic at a club downtown. Elliot had signed up to read a poem, something he'd never shared with me before. When he took the stage, his voice was raw, trembling, as he spoke about love that felt like drowning, about breaking free only to find the chains still lingered. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. I saw him then, truly saw him, not just the barista with the easy smile, but the man who'd fought to be himself in a world that didn't always make room for him. Afterward, we walked to the waterfront, the city's lights reflecting on the Puget Sound. That was about Ryan, wasn't it? I asked. He nodded, his eyes distant. I thought I loved him, he said. But it wasn't love. It was control. I reached for his hand, squeezing it tight. You're not that person anymore, I said. You're stronger than he ever was. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw hope in his eyes. Fragile but real. But Ryan wasn't done with him. The texts kept coming, each one more insistent. I miss you. You owe me a chance. Don't make me come find you. I saw one pop up on Elliot's phone when he left it on the table, and my blood ran cold. This wasn't just an ex who couldn't let go. His was a threat. I wanted to confront him, to protect Elliot, but I didn't know how without making things worse. All I could do was be there, every day, showing him he wasn't alone. The tension grew like a storm cloud over us. Elliot tried to hide it, but I could see the strain in his eyes, the way he flinched when his phone buzzed. I started staying later at the cafe, sketching in the corner until his shift ended, just to make sure he got home safe. Seattle's streets felt less welcoming now, like Ryan could be lurking around any corner. I didn't know what he looked like, but I imagined him everywhere, a shadow in the crowd, a stranger staring too long. One afternoon, Elliot's manager, a no-nonsense woman named Maria, pulled him aside. I couldn't hear what they said, but his shoulders slumped when he came back. She's cutting my hours, he said, his voice hollow. Says I'm distracted. I wanted to argue, to storm into her office and tell her he was being stalked. But Elliot stopped me. It's fine, he said, but it wasn't. Nothing about this was fine. That night, we went to his apartment, a tiny studio in Capitol Hill cluttered with books and half-finished paintings. He poured us wine, and we sat on the floor, the city's hum filtering through the open window. I'm scared, Caleb, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Ryan knows where I work. What if he shows up? I pulled him close, his head resting against my chest. He won't touch you, I said, fierce and certain. I won't let him. But words weren't enough. The next day, I found Elliot in the cafe's back room, staring at a text. I saw you with him. You think he's better than me? My stomach dropped. Ryan had been watching us. I grabbed Elliot's hand. You need to block him, I said, or go to the police. He shook his head. You don't know Ryan. He's connected. He'll twist it. Make it my fault. I hated how powerless I felt, but I wasn't giving up. Not on him. We started taking precautions, walking different routes, avoiding late-night hangouts. I even downloaded an app to track Elliot's location, just in case. It felt paranoid, but the fear was real. One evening, as we left the cafe, I saw a guy across the street, tall, broad-shouldered, staring at us. My heart raced. Is that him? I whispered. Elliot's face paled. Yeah, he said, gripping my arm. Ryan didn't approach, but his presence was a warning, heavy and cold. The next morning, I convinced Elliot to talk to Maria again. She listened, her face softening, and promised to keep an eye out. She even offered to call security if Ryan showed up. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night, Elliot invited me to a drag show, a rare moment of lightness. We laughed, danced, and for a few hours, forgot the shadow hanging over us. But when we stepped outside, Ryan was there, leaning against a lamppost, his eyes locked on Elliot. Caleb, go, Elliot whispered, his voice shaking. I'll handle this. I refused. Not a chance, I said, stepping between them. Ryan smirked, his voice smooth and venomous. So you're the new guy? He said. Elliot's always had a thing for strays. My fists clenched, but Elliot grabbed my arm. Don't, he pleaded. Ryan laughed, walking away, but his words lingered like poison. That night, Elliot broke down, sobbing in my arms. I thought I was free, he said, but he's never going to let me go. I held him, my own fear mixing with anger. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing: I loved him. And love meant fighting, even when the odds felt impossible. The weeks that followed were a tightrope walk. Elliot and I grew closer, our bond forged in the crucible of fear and defiance. We spent every spare moment together, building a fragile cocoon of safety. But Ryan's shadow loomed larger. His text stopped, which should have been a relief. But it wasn't. Silence from someone like him felt like the calm before a storm. I started researching restraining orders, talking to friends who knew the legal system. It wasn't easy. Ryan had a clean record, and Elliot's fear wasn't enough to convince a judge. He's too smart, Elliot said one night, his voice bitter. He knows how to stay just inside the line. I hated how helpless I felt, but I kept digging, determined to find a way to protect him. One evening, we went to a support group for queer survivors of abuse, something Elliot had found online. The room was small, filled with people whose stories mirrored his love twisted into control, trust shattered by manipulation. Elliot didn't speak, but I saw the way his shoulders relaxed, the way he listened. For the first time, he wasn't alone in this. Afterward, he squeezed my hand. Thank you, he said, for not giving up on me. But Ryan wasn't done. One morning, I arrived at the cafe to find Elliot shaken, his hands trembling as he poured a latte. He was here, he whispered. Before we opened, just stood outside, staring. Maria had called the police, but Ryan was gone by the time they arrived. I wanted to scream, to hunt him down, but I knew that would only make things worse. Instead, I stayed by Elliot's side, my presence a silent promise. That night, we made a plan. Elliot would move to a new apartment, one Ryan didn't know about. I'd help him cover the costs, dipping into my savings from freelance gigs. It felt like a small victory, a step toward freedom. We spent the weekend packing, laughing over his collection of mismatched mugs, stealing kisses between boxes. For a moment, it felt like we could outrun the past. But Ryan was always one step ahead. On moving day, we found a note slipped under Elliot's door: "You can't hide from me." My blood ran cold. How did he know? We checked the locks, the windows, but there was no sign of a break-in. Elliot's face was ashen, his hands shaking as he crumpled the note. "He's not going to stop," he said, his voice breaking. I pulled him into my arms, my own fear swallowed by the need to be strong for him. We moved him anyway, to a small place in Fremont with a view of the canal. It wasn't perfect, but it was a fresh start. I stayed over that first night, sleeping on the couch, my phone on in case he needed me. Around 2 a.m., I heard him crying softly. I went to him, crawling into bed and holding him until the sobs stopped. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. I kissed his forehead. "You deserve everything," I said, and I meant it. The new apartment gave us a sliver of peace, but it was fragile. Elliot threw himself into work, picking up extra shifts to rebuild his savings. I spent my days sketching logos for clients, my nights with him, trying to keep the darkness at bay. We were building something real, something worth fighting for. But Ryan's presence lingered like a ghost. One evening, I got a call from Maria. "Caleb, you need to get here. Now." Her voice was sharp, urgent. I raced to the cafe, my heart pounding. When I arrived, Elliot was in the back, pale and shaking. Maria, standing guard like a mother bear. Ryan came in. She said. Tried to order like nothing was wrong. I kicked him out. But he's still outside. I looked through the window and saw him. Pacing. His eyes locked on the door. I wanted to confront him. To end this. But Elliot grabbed my arm. Don't. He said. He wants you to react. I hated it. But he was right. Ryan thrived on control. And losing my temper would only give him power. Instead, we called the police again. And this time, they escorted him away. It wasn't a solution. But it bought us time. Elliot started therapy. Something the support group had recommended. I went with him to the first session. Waiting in the lobby. Sketching to keep my nerves in check. When he came out, his eyes were red but clearer. Like a weight had lifted. I'm starting to understand. He said. Why I let him in. Why I stayed. I didn't push for details. Just held his hand as we walked home. The cafe became our fortress. Maria trained the staff to watch for Ryan. And they rallied around Elliot. Slipping him extra pastries. Cracking jokes to make him smile. It was a small community. But it was fierce. And I was grateful for every one of them. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Ryan wasn't the type to give up. One night, we went to a queer film festival. A rare date where we could just be us. The movie was about two men finding love in a world that didn't always accept them. And I felt Elliot's hand tighten in mine during the quiet moments. Afterward, we walked through Pioneer Square. The cobblestones slick with rain. I want this, he said suddenly. Us. A life. Without fear. I stopped, pulling him close. We'll get there. I promised. Together. But the next morning, everything changed. I woke up to a text from an unknown number, a photo of Elliot and me. Taken outside the cafe the night before. My heart stopped. Ryan was closer than we thought. And he wasn't just watching, was documenting. I showed Elliot. And his face crumpled. I can't keep doing this. He said. I'm dragging you into my mess. I grabbed his shoulders. You're not dragging me anywhere. I said. I'm here because I love you. Those 3 words, I love you, hung in the air. Raw and unguarded. Elliot's eyes widened. And for a moment, I thought I'd scared him off. But then he kissed me. Fierce and desperate. Like he was trying to anchor himself to something real. I love you too. He whispered. And it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. But love, I was learning, didn't erase fear. It just gave you a reason to fight through it. We went to the police again, armed with the photo and a log of Ryan's texts. The officer was sympathetic but blunt, without direct threats or physical evidence. There wasn't much they could do. Get a restraining order, she said. It's your best shot. So we did, spending hours at the courthouse, filling out forms, recounting every encounter. The judge granted a temporary order, but Ryan would have to be served. And that meant finding him. The thought made my skin crawl. Elliot's therapy sessions became a lifeline. He started opening up about the years with Ryan, the way he'd been chipped away at until he barely recognized himself. I thought I was nothing without him. He told me one night, his voice steady but laced with pain. But you make me feel like I'm enough. I wanted to cry, to tell him he was more than enough. But I just held him, letting my presence speak for me. The cafe staff became our unofficial bodyguards. Maria installed a new security camera, and a coworker named Jaden, a burly trans guy with a heart of gold, started walking Elliot home when I couldn't. We were building a network, a family. and it gave me hope. But hope is a fragile thing, and Ryan knew how to shatter it. One evening, I got a call from Jaden. "He's here," he said, his voice low. "At the cafe. He's asking for Elliot." I was across town, working on a client pitch, but I dropped everything and ran. When I arrived, Ryan was gone, but Elliot was a wreck, hiding in the back room. He said he just wanted to talk. Elliot said, his voice shaking. "But I know him. He's planning something." We decided to take a break from the city. A friend of mine had a cabin in the Cascades, a few hours away, and we borrowed it for the weekend. The mountains were quiet, the air sharp with pine, and for 2 days, we were just us, no phones, no threats, just long walks and late-night talks by the fire. Elliot laughed more than I'd ever heard, and I saw glimpses of the person he was before Ryan. I wanted to bottle that feeling, to keep it forever. But reality waited for us. When we got back, there was a letter taped to Elliot's apartment door. No return address, just his name in sharp, angry handwriting. Inside was a single sentence: "You'll never be free." Elliot's hands shook as he read it, and I felt a rage I'd never known. This wasn't just about Elliot and Anna Maria, it was about us. Our future. Everything we were fighting for. We couldn't ignore it anymore. Ryan wasn't just a ghost, was a predator. And he was closing in. I convinced Elliot to stay with me for a while, in my cramped Belltown apartment, where at least I could keep an eye on him. My place wasn't much: bare walls, a futon, stacks of sketchbooks, but it was safe. And that was enough. We fell into a rhythm, cooking dinners together, watching old movies, pretending the world outside wasn't waiting to tear us apart. But the fear followed us. Elliot started having nightmares, waking up gasping, his face slick with sweat. "He's in my head," he said one night, his voice small. I held him, whispering that he was safe, but I wasn't sure I believed it. Ryan was out there, and the restraining order felt like a paper shield against a storm. I reached out to a lawyer friend, Sarah, who specialized in harassment cases. She met us at a diner, her eyes sharp as she listened to our story. "You need evidence," she said. "Texts, photos, anything that shows he's violating the order." We showed her everything: the texts, the photo, the letter. She nodded, her jaw tight. "This is enough to push for a permanent order," she said. "But you need to be careful. Guys like this don't back down easily." The next day, I installed a cheap security camera outside my apartment. It wasn't much, but it gave us a sense of control. Elliot started carrying pepper spray, and I made sure we were never alone in public. It felt like we were preparing for war. But what else could we do? Love had brought us together, but it was courage that would keep us there. Then, it happened. I was at the cafe, waiting for Elliot's shift to end, when Ryan walked in. The air shifted, like the room itself held its breath. He didn't approach the counter, just sat in a corner, staring at Elliot, who froze behind the espresso machine. Maria was on him in seconds, her voice low but firm. "You need to leave. Now." Ryan smirked, standing slowly, his eyes never leaving Elliot. "I'll be back," he said, and walked out. Elliot was shaking when I reached him. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice breaking. I pulled him into the back room, away from the curious eyes of customers. "We're going to end this," I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at me. "I promise." That night, we met with Sarah again, who filed an emergency motion to extend the restraining order. She also suggested we go public share Elliot's story on social media. Let the community rally around us. It was risky, but we were out of options. The post went up on X. A simple message about love, fear, and fighting back. Within hours, it was shared hundreds of times. Friends, strangers, even the cafe's regulars chimed in with support. A local queer organization offered legal help, and someone even recognized Ryan, tipping off the police to his whereabouts. For the first time, it felt like we weren't alone. The tide was turning, but it wasn't over. The police found Ryan at a bar downtown, serving him the permanent restraining order. He didn't fight it, just smiled that cold, calculated smile, like he was biding his time. But the community's response had shaken him. His name was out there now, his actions exposed. It wasn't justice. Not yet. But it was a start. Elliot and I leaned on each other, stronger for it. The cafe became a symbol of resilience, with customers leaving notes of support on napkins, slipping tips into a jar labeled for Elliot's new start. Maria gave him his full hours back, and Jaden organized a fundraiser to help with legal fees. It was humbling, seeing how many people cared, how many saw us not as a problem, but as a cause worth fighting for. One evening, as we closed the cafe, Elliot pulled me aside. "I want to do something," he said, his eyes bright with determination. He'd written another poem, this one about healing, about finding love after loss. He read it at the next open mic, his voice steady, powerful, filling the room with hope. When he finished, the crowd erupted, and I saw tears in his eyes, not from pain, but from pride. He was reclaiming himself, piece by piece. Ryan's presence faded, not because he was gone, but because we were stronger. The restraining order held, and the community's watchful eyes kept him at bay. We heard he'd moved to another city, chasing some new obsession, but we didn't let ourselves dwell on it. Fear had ruled us for too long. Now, it was time to live. Elliot and I started planning a future. He enrolled in a business course, dreaming of that cafe he'd always wanted. I took on bigger clients, my sketches turning into real campaigns. We moved in together, into a small loft with a view of the city we'd fought to call home. It wasn't perfect, there were still nightmares, still moments of doubt, but it was ours. One morning, as we stood at the Starbucks counter, now customers instead of barista and regular, Elliot handed me a coffee cup. Written in Sharpie, in his familiar scrawl, was a simple message: "Forever starts here." I looked at him, my heart full, and smiled. "Hot?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. "Always," I said, and we laughed, the sound carrying over the hum of the cafe. A reminder that love, when it's real, is worth every battle. We weren't just surviving anymore, we were thriving. And in a world that didn't always make room for us. That was the greatest victory of all.